welcome to the BBC's News at 6. British banks have lost hundreds of millions of pounds in one of the world's biggest cases of financial fraud. A New York financier, Bernard Madoff, is accused of losing up to $50 billion worth of investors' cash in a racket that could further damage banks already reeling from the credit crunch. HSBC and RBS are among those hits, as well as Santander, which owns Abbey, Alliance and Leicester, and parts of Bradford and Bingley. Here's our business correspondent, Emma Simpson.
This may go down as the biggest fraud in the history of Wall Street, a $50 billion swindle that's caught up some of the biggest names in global finance. And some of our banks are among the victims. HSBC admitted today that it could potentially lose up to $1 billion from its investments in the venture. RBS and Santander, the Spanish bank that owns Abbey, also had millions in the fraudulent fund. And it's emerged that two local authority pension schemes, Merseyside and Hampshire, had also invested millions through a fund that fed money into the collapse scheme. But the impact, they say, will be small. This is the man who persuaded not only the big banks but the super rich to part with their cash. Bernard Madoff, 70 years old, a pillar of Wall Street. He seemed the ultimate safe pair of hands. Here he is last year, speaking at a conference about financial regulation.
It's impossible for you to go for a violation to go undetected. Certainly not for a considerable period of time.
But he apparently managed. So how did Bernie Madoff carry out his fraud? He's confessed to setting up a kind of pyramid scheme. Investors poured money into his fund, attracted by the promise of high returns. Other investors followed, but when the older clients started to withdraw their cash, Madoff used money from his new clients to make the payouts. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, and it quickly unravelled as the credit crunch took hold. Arnold and Joan Sinkin lost $1 million. They say they'll now have to sell their retirement home.
This is what they refer to as the golden years, where you retire and you try and enjoy life, and then you get wiped out in 48 hours.
Could such a fraud happen here? The Serious Fraud Office say they're looking into the Madoff case, undertaking an interest in credit crunch fraud.
We've heard all sorts of stories about what's been happening, very concerned about that, very concerned to get the evidence if there's been serious and complex fraud. Lots of areas that interest us. Now we need more help from the public in following that up.
There's much still to investigate on Wall Street too. Where has the money gone? And how did Bernie Madoff allegedly manage to hoodwink so many people for so long? Emma Simpson, BBC News.
Well, our business editor Robert Peston is here with me. Robert, this is the last thing British banks needed.
You're absolutely right, George. I mean, they need this like a hole in the head. I mean, they've lost colossal sums on exposure to subprime. They're now losing more on plain vanilla mortgages, lending to companies. This loss through the fraudulent behaviour of this extraordinary individual, well, you know, bad news.
What about the regulators? How are they supposed to stop this sort of thing ever happening?
Well, in the States, I'm afraid regulation of hedge funds for years has been seen by many experts as almost non-existent, very, very lax. Now, that's going to change. It's quite clear that the regulation of funds like this will now get a lot tighter. But I think questions also have to be asked about the professional investors who put their money in. There were lots of alarms ringing over many years that the returns that Madoff was making were not consistent with what he was saying about the way he made his money. So some experts said this is too good to be true. The rule in life is if something is too good to be true or looks too good to be true, chances are I'm afraid that it is too good to be true. But I'm afraid old-fashioned greed got in the way of common sense, and people who should have known better gave money to this man, and it does appear that he's lost, a mind-boggling amount.
All right, Robert, thank you. The Royal Mail faces financial disaster unless it's radically